My name is Eleanor Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never thought my own flesh and blood would abandon me at a train station without a penny to my name. Richard, my only son, drove away that day thinking I was helpless. What he failed to realize was that beneath my gray hair and gentle demeanor lies a woman who survived far worse than his betrayal. Before I tell you what happened next, would you take a moment to let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button? Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. After my husband Frank passed away 5 years ago, I settled into what I thought would be a comfortable widowhood. Frank had built Wilson Construction from nothing into one of the most respected firms in Connecticut. While he was the face of the company, I worked alongside him for 40 years, handling the books and maintaining client relationships. Many people thought I was just the wife, but Frank always made it clear that we were partners in every sense. Our beautiful colonial home in Westport became my sanctuary after he died. It sits on 2 acres with gardens I tend myself, despite Richard constantly suggesting I hire someone. "Mom, you need to take it easy at your age," he'd say, though I've always been healthy and active. Those gardens kept me sane after Frank died, giving me purpose during those first lonely months. Frank left me financially secure. Besides the house and savings, I received life insurance and retirement funds. The business had been sold years earlier when Frank's heart problems began, so there was no worry about managing that. I've always been careful with money, a habit from growing up with parents who lived through the Depression. My father taught me to save and invest, advice I've followed all my life. Richard is our only child. For years, he was the son every mother dreams of, attentive, kind, and seemingly devoted. He'd visit every Sunday for dinner, call midweek to check on me, and always remembered my birthday with flowers and thoughtful gifts. But looking back, I can see how things began to change after he married Karen 7 years ago. Karen never warmed to me, though I tried everything to welcome her to our family. I hosted beautiful holiday gatherings, gave generous wedding and housewarming gifts, and always offered to help with their son Jason, my precious grandson. Karen would accept my help with childcare but maintained a polite distance otherwise. When I'd visit their home, she'd often find reasons to be busy elsewhere. Richard would make excuses for her. "She's just stressed from work," or "she's not close with her own mother, so this is hard for her." I could have accepted a distant relationship with my daughter-in-law, but what troubled me was how Richard changed in her presence. The warm, open conversations we once shared became superficial. He'd cut visits short when she texted, and gradually those Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. Meanwhile, their lifestyle grew increasingly lavish. Richard had followed his father into construction but never achieved the same success. Still, they purchased a home in an exclusive neighborhood, took exotic vacations, and drove luxury cars. When Richard started his own company 3 years ago, I happily invested $200,000 to help him get started. The business struggled, but their spending never slowed. It was about 2 years ago when I first noticed small amounts missing from the joint checking account I shared with Richard. We had opened it years ago so he could help with bills if I became ill. The amounts were never large, $300 here, $500 there. But they were unauthorized. When I questioned Richard, he seemed genuinely confused, then suggested I had forgotten writing checks. "Mom, you know how forgetful you've been lately," he said, though I had no memory problems whatsoever. Then came the documents papers Richard would bring for me to sign, always when he was in a rush. "Just some account updates, Mom." Or, "This makes things easier for estate purposes." I signed a few before my internal alarm went off. One evening when Richard stepped outside to take a call, I examined a document more carefully and discovered it would have transferred my investment account into a joint account with him as primary holder. That night, I called my late husband's financial advisor, Maxwell Bennett. We met for lunch the following day, and his concern was immediate. "Eleanor, these aren't routine documents. Someone is trying to position themselves to take control of your assets." He helped me secure my accounts and suggested I be very careful about what I signed going forward. I began paying closer attention to conversations between Richard and Karen when they thought I couldn't hear. Once, while supposedly napping in the guest room during a visit, I overheard Karen saying, "How much longer do we have to wait? That house alone would solve everything." Richard's response chilled me. Mom's health is good, but we're making progress on the financial front. Just be patient. That evening, I contacted my bank and had my name removed from the joint account with Richard. I opened a new account at a different bank. I also met with my attorney to update my will and establish a trust for Jason that neither Richard nor Karen could access. The trust would ensure my grandson could attend college and have a solid start in life, regardless of what happened with his parents. Jason, my 12-year-old grandson, became my greatest joy and deepest concern. Unlike his parents, his affection seemed genuine and untainted. He loved coming to Grandma's house where cookies were plentiful and stories about his father as a boy made him giggle. During one visit, Jason innocently mentioned, "Dad says when you're gone we'll move into this house and I can have the big bedroom upstairs." My heart sank at his words, but I maintained my smile. Is that so? Well, Grandma's not going anywhere for a long time. Later, when Jason was playing video games, I asked what else his parents said about my house. With the unfiltered honesty of a child, he replied, "Mom says it's too nice for just one old lady and all the antiques will be worth a lot." I hugged him extra tight that day, knowing he had no idea what he was revealing. The last time I saw Jason before everything changed was at a dinner I hosted at my home. Richard and Karen were unusually attentive, complimenting the meal and asking about family heirlooms they'd never shown interest in before. Jason seemed subdued, picking at his food until I asked what was wrong. "Are you really going to a special hospital, Grandma?" he asked, his voice small. Before I could respond, Richard jumped in. "Mom's just going to visit Aunt Martha, buddy. Remember we talked about this?" Jason's eyes filled with tears as he hugged me goodbye that night. "I love you, Grandma," he whispered. Something in his voice told me he was afraid it might be the last time he'd see me. Looking back, I believe he'd overheard more than his parents realized. That dinner was the final warning sign I chose to ignore, clinging to the hope that I was misreading the situation, that my son couldn't possibly be planning what I feared. Sometimes, even when all evidence points to betrayal, a mother's heart refuses to believe it until the moment truth becomes undeniable. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April. I was pruning roses in the garden when my phone rang, displaying Richard's name. "Mom, great news." His voice carried an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in months. "I've arranged for you to visit Aunt Martha in Boston this weekend. I know you've been talking about seeing her, and her health hasn't been great lately." This was true. My sister Martha was recovering from hip surgery, and I had mentioned wanting to visit. Still, the sudden arrangement caught me off guard. "That's thoughtful, Richard, but I usually plan my own trips. And I'd need to pack and prepare the house." "Already taken care of," he replied smoothly. "I've booked your train ticket for Friday morning. I'll drive you to the station, and Martha's son will pick you up in Boston. You deserve a break, Mom. Let us handle everything for once." The offer was tempting yet unsettling. Martha and I were close, speaking weekly by phone. She hadn't mentioned any arrival plans, which seemed odd. When I called her later that day, her line went straight to voicemail. I left a message but received no reply, which was unusual for my punctilious sister. Despite my growing suspicions, part of me desperately wanted to believe this was a genuine gesture from my son. Perhaps the strain in our relationship had been my imagination. Perhaps this trip was an olive branch, a chance to rebuild our bond. I spent Thursday packing with care, selecting comfortable clothes for a week's stay. Years of traveling with Frank had taught me to prepare for contingencies, so I sewed $100 cash and a copy of my ID into the lining of my coat, an old habit Frank had called my spy routine. I also tucked a small emergency phone into my bra, another precaution from years of Frank insisting I have backup communication when traveling. The morning of our departure, Richard arrived unnaturally cheerful, whistling as he carried my suitcase to his car. Karen wasn't with him, which I found strange since she usually participated in family events, if only to monitor them. "Where's Karen?" I asked as we backed out of my driveway. "Migraine," Richard replied quickly. "She wanted to come but was feeling terrible this morning. She sends her love." Karen had never sent her love in the 7 years I'd known her, but I nodded and let it pass. As we drove, Richard's conversation focused unusually on my financial affairs. "Mom, have you thought more about transferring the house into a trust?" It would really help with taxes when the time comes. When what time comes, Richard? You know, eventually. He kept his eyes fixed on the road. We all have to plan ahead. Dad was always so careful about these things. Yes, he was, I agreed. That's why he set everything up to protect me for the rest of my life. Richard's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. But what about the family legacy? Don't you want to make sure everything transfers smoothly to me and Jason? Jason's future is secure, I said carefully. And as for legacies, the most important ones aren't about money. He changed the subject then, asking if I had my phone. When I pulled it out, he frowned. That's not holding a charge properly. Let me see it. Before I could object, he took the phone, examined it briefly, then pocketed it. I'll have it fixed while you're away. Martha's son has your number if you need to call me. The train station was crowded when we arrived, the morning rush in full swing. Richard seemed jittery, checking his watch repeatedly as he removed my suitcase from the trunk. Wait here on this bench, Mom. I need to find parking. Then I'll get your ticket and we'll go to the platform together. I settled on the bench, my coat pulled tight against the spring chill. Don't be long, I called as he walked away. The Boston train leaves in 40 minutes. Back in 10, he promised with a wave. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I watched the station clock with growing unease. At the 40-minute mark, I rose to look for him, scanning the parking area visible from my position. That's when I saw it. Richard's silver BMW pulling out of the lot, turning onto the main road. I stood frozen, unable to process what my eyes were telling me. Perhaps he'd forgotten something at home? Perhaps there was an emergency with Karen? But deep down I knew. The careful planning. The missing phone. The mysterious documents. The conversations about my house and finances. All the pieces suddenly formed a clear and heartbreaking picture. My son had abandoned me at the train station, taking my phone, wallet, and luggage. I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a coat hiding my emergency precautions. As his car disappeared from view, the full weight of his betrayal crushed against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. For a moment, I feared I might collapse right there on the station concourse. But something inside me hardened instead. A steely determination rising from a lifetime of overcoming challenges. Frank's voice seemed to whisper in my ear. Ellie, you're tougher than anyone knows. Show them what you're made of. My son had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he'd left his elderly mother helpless and alone. He had no idea what I was about to do. The first few minutes after watching Richard's car disappear were a blur of disbelief and physical shock. My legs trembled, and a cold sweat broke across my forehead as I lowered myself back onto the bench. Around me, the station bustled with commuters rushing to their destinations, completely unaware that my world had just imploded. This can't be happening, I whispered to myself, drawing concerned glances from a woman passing by. I patted my pockets instinctively, confirming what I already knew: my wallet and phone were gone, taken by my own son. The only identification I had was the copy sewn into my coat, along with the emergency $100, precautions I'd taken almost automatically, never truly believing I'd need them. As the initial shock began to fade, a terrible clarity took its place. Richard hadn't abandoned me by accident or misunderstanding. This was calculated. He'd taken my phone so I couldn't call for help. He'd left me with no ID or money so I'd be forced to contact authorities, appearing confused and helpless. The pieces fit together with sickening precision. He was setting the stage to declare me incompetent, to take control of my finances and property. Memories flooded back of comments and incidents I dismissed over recent months. Richard suggesting to my doctor that I seemed confused sometimes. The missing financial documents that later reappeared in different folders. The unexpected visits where he'd inspect my refrigerator and medicine cabinet as if taking inventory. What I'd interpreted as occasional thoughtlessness now revealed itself as a systematic campaign. My hands shook with a mixture of hurt and anger, but I forced myself to think practically. Frank had always said, "In a crisis, take stock before you act." So I did. I had identification and money hidden in my coat. I had my emergency phone. I knew my banker's number by heart. I was not, in fact, helpless. Standing on unsteady legs, I approached a security guard near the information desk. The young man looked up with professional detachment as I approached. "Ma'am, can I help you?" I considered telling him everything. That my son had just abandoned me as part of a scheme to steal my estate. But some instinct held me back. Until I understood the full extent of Richard's plan, I needed to be careful about creating official records that might later be used against me. "I seem to have lost my companion and my handbag," I said instead. "Is there a lost and found? Or perhaps a quiet place where I could gather my thoughts?" The guard directed me to a waiting area away from the main concourse. As I turned to go, a woman about my age touched my elbow gently. "Excuse me," she said. I couldn't help overhearing. "Are you all right?" Her name was Ruth Barnes, a retired elementary school teacher waiting for a train to visit her daughter. Something about her kind eyes and no-nonsense manner reminded me of my sister Martha. When she offered me the use of her cell phone, I accepted gratefully. "Family trouble?" she asked perceptively as we sat on a bench in the quieter waiting area. "You could say that," I replied, unsure how much to share with a stranger. Ruth patted my hand. "I raised 4 children. Family trouble can mean anything from a small disagreement to outright betrayal. Whatever it is, you look like you could use a friend right now." Perhaps it was her genuine warmth, or perhaps just the overwhelming events of the morning, but I found myself telling Ruth a simplified version of my situation. My son was supposed to help me catch a train to visit my sister. Instead, he drove off with my luggage, wallet, and phone. Ruth's expression shifted from sympathy to indignation. "That's not just trouble, that's abandonment. We should call the police." "Not yet," I said quickly. "There are complications. Financial matters involved. I need to secure some things first." Ruth studied me carefully, then nodded. "You seem perfectly clear-headed to me. What do you need most right now?" "To make some urgent calls, if you don't mind lending your phone a bit longer." "Take all the time you need," she said, handing me her cell phone again. "I'm not going anywhere for another hour." My hand still trembled slightly as I dialed the number for First National Bank, where most of my assets were held. Frank and I had banked there for 40 years, and the current manager, Thomas Wright, had been a personal friend of Frank's. "Thomas Wright's office," answered his assistant. "This is Eleanor Wilson. I need to speak with Thomas immediately. It's an emergency." The urgency in my voice must have carried through, because Thomas came on the line moments later. "Eleanor? What's happened?" "Thomas, I need you to place an immediate freeze on all my accounts. And I mean right now while we're on the phone." There was a brief pause. "Eleanor, are your cards lost or stolen?" "In a manner of speaking. My son has them, and I have reason to believe he may attempt unauthorized withdrawals. Substantial ones." Thomas's voice sharpened. "Has there been a transaction already?" "I don't know. That's why I'm calling." I heard keyboard clicks in the background. Then Thomas's voice tense. "There's a withdrawal in process right now from your primary savings account. $40,000, initiated online 15 minutes ago." My stomach lurched. "Stop it. Already done." "Eleanor, what's going on? Do you need help? Should I contact the authorities?" "Not yet. I need to secure everything first." "Is my money safe for the moment?" "Yes, I've frozen everything. No transactions can proceed without in-person verification with photo ID." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by a surge of determination. "Thank you, Thomas. Now I need you to do something else. Please transfer all funds from accounts ending in 4382, 7291, and 5603 to my separate account ending in 8547. This last account was one Richard knew nothing about. I had opened it privately after first noticing money missing from our joint account. The accounts I named contain the bulk of my liquid assets, nearly $2.7 million. That's a significant transfer, Eleanor. Are you certain? Absolutely certain. And Thomas, I'll be coming in personally next week to make additional security arrangements. Until then, no information about my accounts is to be shared with anyone, especially not family members claiming to act on my behalf. After finishing with Thomas, I called Maxwell Bennett, Frank's financial advisor, who now managed my investment portfolio. If Richard was making a move on my bank accounts, he might target my investments next. Maxwell answered on the second ring. Eleanor? This is unexpected. How are you? Not well, Maxwell. I need your help immediately. I explained the situation briefly. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. This is serious, Eleanor. Very serious. I can secure your investment accounts right away, but we should discuss additional protective measures. Can you come to my office? Not today. I'm stranded at the train station without transportation. Without hesitation, Maxwell offered. Give me the address. I'll have a car service pick you up. We need to address this situation properly. As I ended the call, I felt a subtle shift inside me. The paralyzing shock was giving way to something else. A calm, focused anger and a growing sense of my own power. Richard had expected me to panic, to call him crying for help or to contact authorities who might view me as a confused elderly woman. Instead, I had frozen my accounts before he could complete his theft, secured my investments, and was taking strategic steps rather than merely reacting. The emergency cash and ID I'd hidden, the phone numbers I'd memorized, the precautions I'd taken all reflected an inner strength and foresight that Richard had fatally underestimated. Ruth watched me with undisguised admiration as I handed back her phone. Well, she said, you certainly don't seem helpless to me. I smiled for the first time since Richard had driven away. I'm not. And my son is about to discover exactly what that means. Ruth hesitated, then offered. My apartment is nearby. You're welcome to use it as a base while you sort things out. Seems like you might need somewhere safe to regroup. Her kindness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. In the midst of profound betrayal, this stranger was extending a helping hand without question or condition. Thank you, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I would appreciate that very much. As we left the station together, I realized something important had shifted. I was no longer simply a victim of my son's betrayal. I was a woman taking back control, drawing on resources both external and internal. The game Richard thought he was playing had changed fundamentally, because while he believed he'd abandoned a helpless old woman, he'd actually unleashed a formidable opponent. Ruth's apartment was a cozy two-bedroom on the third floor of a well-maintained building about 15 minutes from the train station. Filled with books, comfortable furniture, and photographs of what I assumed were her children and grandchildren, it radiated warmth and security. Exactly what I needed in that moment. The guest room is small but comfortable, she said, showing me to a neat space with a single bed and desk. Make yourself at home. There's fresh towels in the bathroom cabinet, and I'll put on some coffee. Ruth, I can't thank you enough, I said, suddenly overwhelmed by her kindness. You've taken in a complete stranger. She waved away my thanks. I've been teaching elementary school for 40 years before retiring. I've developed a pretty good sense about people. You're not a scammer or a danger. You're a woman in trouble who needs a safe place. Besides, she added with a wink, you remind me of my favorite aunt. She took no nonsense from anyone either. Over coffee at her kitchen table, I explained more fully what had happened and what I suspected Richard was planning. Ruth listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly indignant. So he abandoned you as part of a scheme to take control of your money? To claim you have dementia or something similar? That's my belief, I confirmed. He's been laying groundwork for months, comments to friends about my confusion, suggestions to my doctor about memory concerns, documents I was pressured to sign. Today was meant to be the culmination. Leave me stranded and disoriented, then find me in a confused state. Ruth's jaw tightened. That's not just cruel, it's criminal. Elder abuse and attempted financial exploitation at minimum. Exactly. Which is why I need to be very strategic about what happens next. This isn't just about securing my finances. It's about protecting myself legally and making sure Richard can't try something like this again. As if on cue, my emergency phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. It was Maxwell's assistant confirming that a car would arrive in 30 minutes to bring me to his office. Perfect timing, I said to Ruth. My financial advisor is sending transportation. I need to map out a complete strategy, not just react to Richard's moves. Ruth nodded approvingly. You need a war room, not just a hiding place. Exactly. I squeezed her hand gratefully. Would you mind if I continued to use your apartment as my base for a few days? I'll compensate you, of course. Don't be ridiculous. You stay as long as you need, no compensation required. In fact, I'd feel better knowing you're somewhere safe while dealing with this. Besides, she added with a smile, it's been lonely since my husband passed. Some company would be welcome. The car Maxwell sent was a discreet black sedan with a professional driver who asked for no identification beyond my name. 45 minutes later, I was seated in Maxwell's office in downtown Boston, a space I had visited many times with Frank but rarely alone. Maxwell had aged since I'd seen him last. More gray in his beard, deeper lines around his eyes, but his handshake was firm and his gaze direct as he guided me to a comfortable chair. Eleanor, I've taken the liberty of inviting our legal counsel to join us, he said, indicating a sharp-looking woman in her 40s. This is Sarah Abernathy, who specializes in elder law and financial protection. Sarah's handshake was as firm as Maxwell's. Mrs. Wilson, I'm sorry about the circumstances of our meeting, but I'm here to help ensure your assets remain fully protected. For the next 2 hours, the three of us constructed what Maxwell called a financial fortress. We revoked all previous powers of attorney that might give Richard any access. We changed access protocols on every account. We created new accounts with different institutions, accessible only with in-person verification using biometric confirmation. What about my home? I asked. Could Richard try to claim ownership or force a sale? Sarah shook her head confidently. The property is solely in your name, and Connecticut has strong homeowner protections. Nevertheless, I'll file additional protective documentation with the county recorder's office today. No one will be able to initiate any action regarding your property without your explicit, notarized consent. As we worked, my emergency phone began receiving text messages from Richard. The first simply asked if anyone had heard from me. The next, sent an hour later, expressed concern that I hadn't arrived at Aunt Martha's as expected. By the third message, his tone had grown frantic, claiming I had wandered off at the train station and he was desperately worried. I showed the messages to Maxwell and Sarah. He's creating a paper trail, Sarah observed grimly, setting up evidence of your supposed confusion to support whatever claim he plans to make. Should I respond? I asked. Not yet, Sarah advised. Let's complete our security measures first. Then we'll craft a strategic response that protects your interests. By late afternoon, we had constructed comprehensive protection for all my assets. The $2.7 million I had transferred was now in highly secure accounts. My investment portfolio had been moved to new accounts with enhanced security. My property was legally fortified against any claims. All my previous financial instruments that Richard might have known about were either closed or emptied. Now, said Maxwell, leaning back in his chair, let's discuss Richard's likely next moves and how to counter them. Sarah nodded in agreement. Based on his actions and messages, he's clearly building toward some claim of diminished capacity on your part. He'll likely report you missing to local authorities, portraying himself as a concerned son worried about his confused mother. He may even file for emergency guardianship, Maxwell added, claiming you're unable to manage your affairs and need him to step in for your own protection. I felt a chill at how methodically they outlined what was likely Richard's exact plan. So what's our counter strategy? Sarah smiled, a professional, slightly predatory smile. Documentation, witnesses, and preemptive action. First, we've documented your competence today through these financial transactions, which require sound decision-making capacity. Second, I'd suggest a formal cognitive assessment with a geriatric specialist. Not because you need it, but to create unimpeachable evidence of your mental acuity. Third, we file a police report about the abandonment incident, framing it accurately as elder abuse rather than letting Richard control the narrative. And fourth, Maxwell added, we prepare for direct confrontation on your terms, not his. I nodded slowly, processing their advice. I want to protect myself, but I also want to send Richard a clear message that I'm not a victim and that there are consequences for what he's done. That's entirely appropriate, Sarah assured me. And frankly, what he's attempted is illegal. You would be justified in pursuing criminal charges. The thought of my son facing criminal charges created a painful knot in my stomach, despite everything. Let's secure my position first. I'll decide about criminal charges later. As our meeting concluded, I checked my emergency phone again. There were 3 missed calls from Richard and a new text message. Mom has been missing for 8 hours. If anyone has seen Eleanor Wilson, 68, gray hair, last seen at North Station this morning, please contact authorities immediately. She may be confused and unable to find her way home. He had even attached a recent photo of me from Thanksgiving dinner. He's escalating, Sarah observed, reading over my shoulder. My guess is he's already filed a missing persons report. Then it's time I controlled the narrative, I said with newfound determination. I'd like to contact the police myself right now and explain exactly what happened today. Sarah nodded approvingly. I'll accompany you to the station. Your statement needs to be clear, detailed, and properly documented. As we prepared to leave Maxwell's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. The initial shock and hurt had crystallized into something harder and more focused. Richard had tried to render me powerless, but instead had only revealed my own strength. Before walking out, I sent a single text message from my emergency phone to Ruth. Financial fortress built. Coming back to base camp. The counterattack begins. Over the next 48 hours, Ruth's apartment became command central for what she jokingly called Operation Prodigal Punishment. From this safe haven, I monitored Richard's increasingly desperate actions while strengthening my own position. After filing a detailed police report documenting the abandonment incident, Sarah helped me obtain security camera footage from the train station showing Richard walking away with my luggage and me left alone on the bench. This evidence would be crucial if Richard tried to claim I had wandered off in a confused state. Meanwhile, Grace Palmer, my neighbor of 20 years, kept me updated on activities at my home. Her first call came just hours after I'd settled back at Ruth's apartment. Eleanor, you won't believe this, Grace said, her voice tight with indignation. Richard and that wife of his are at your house right now. They pulled up about an hour ago with an SUV and let themselves in with a key. They're telling everyone you've had some kind of episode and are being evaluated at a hospital in Boston. I gripped the phone tighter. Are they removing anything from the house? Not that I can see, but they're definitely searching for something. Karen keeps going from window to window, looking through your desk by the bay window, pulling out drawers in the living room. Should I call the police? I considered this briefly before answering. No, not yet. They have a key, so technically they're not breaking in. But could you keep watching and let me know if they start removing furniture or valuables? Of course. I've got my binoculars right here. Harold thinks I'm being nosy, but I told him this is neighborhood security work. I smiled despite everything. Grace had always been vigilant about our street's comings and goings, a trait that had sometimes seemed excessive but now proved invaluable. Throughout that day and the next, Grace provided regular updates. Richard and Karen spent hours at my house, clearly searching for financial documents and valuables. They looked increasingly frustrated as their search proved fruitless, because all important papers were either with me, with my attorney, or in my safe deposit box. While monitoring their actions from afar, I worked through a carefully structured plan with Sarah. First came a comprehensive cognitive assessment with a respected geriatric specialist, Dr. Levine, who documented my excellent mental capacity and specifically noted there were no signs of confusion, memory loss, or decision-making impairment. Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Levine said as our session concluded, I rarely say this during evaluations, but your cognitive function is better than many patients 20 years younger. Whatever concerns have been raised about your capacity are completely unfounded based on my assessment. Next came meetings with my regular physician, who added her own documentation to my medical record stating I was of sound mind and body, capable of managing my own affairs. We also visited my bank, where I appeared in person to verify my identity and confirm all recent security changes had been made with my full understanding and consent. Through it all, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions that left me exhausted each night. The initial shock had given way to focused anger, but underneath ran a current of profound grief. Every protective measure I took hammered home the reality that my only child had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. Every strategic step forward was shadowed by memories of Richard as a little boy, holding my hand and looking up at me with complete trust. "It's okay to mourn while you fight," Ruth said gently one evening, finding me staring at an old family photo I'd pulled up on the tablet Maxwell had provided me. "What he did was terrible, but what you lost was precious." Her words broke something inside me, and for the first time since that morning at the train station, I allowed myself to truly cry deep, wrenching sobs that came from the very core of my being. Ruth sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder, offering silent support until the storm passed. "I don't understand how he could do this," I finally whispered. "Where did I go wrong as a mother?" Ruth's response was firm. "Stop that right now. Richard made his choices as an adult. Maybe he was influenced by his wife, maybe by financial pressure, maybe by simple greed, but none of that is on you. Good parents can have children who make terrible decisions, and that reflects on their character, not your parenting." I dried my eyes and straightened my shoulders. "You're right. And wallowing won't help me protect myself." "Exactly. Feel your feelings, Eleanor, but don't let them derail your purpose." As the second day progressed, Richard's actions grew more frantic. Grace reported that he had brought a locksmith to my house, claiming to neighbors that I had asked him to change the locks for security reasons. Fortunately, the deed to my home was in my name only, and Sarah had already filed protective orders prohibiting any changes to my property without my notarized consent. A quick call from Sarah to the local police resulted in officers arriving to verify authorization, which Richard couldn't provide. By that evening, Richard began calling everyone in my social circle, spinning a story about my disappearance and concerning behavior in recent months. My friend Judith called Ruth's apartment. I had given her the number as a secure contact to warn me. "Eleanor, Richard sounds absolutely frantic," Judith reported. "He's telling everyone you wandered away at the train station, that you've been having episodes of confusion lately, and that he's terrified you're lost somewhere without your medication." "What medication did he say I need?" I asked, curious about how detailed his fabrication had become. "He mentioned something for early cognitive decline that you supposedly started recently. Eleanor, if I didn't know you better, I'd be worried sick based on his description. He's very convincing. That's what makes this so dangerous, Judith. He's building a case piece by piece." "Well, he picked the wrong friends to manipulate. After I got off the phone with him, I called Margaret, then Barbara, then everyone from the garden club. We all agreed something doesn't add up. You were sharp as a tack at last week's meeting, planning the summer exhibition down to the last detail." Judith's support warmed my heart, but Richard's escalation concerned me. If he was willing to lie so boldly to my closest friends, what else might he attempt? The answer came that evening when Ruth's doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, she observed two police officers standing in the hallway. My heart raced as she opened the door. "Good evening, officers. How can I help you?" Ruth asked calmly. "Ma'am, we're conducting a welfare check. We've received a report about an elderly woman named Eleanor Wilson who may be staying at this address. Her son is concerned about her medical condition and cognitive state." Before Ruth could respond, I stepped forward, projecting a confidence I didn't entirely feel.
"I'm Eleanor Wilson.
And I'm perfectly fine, as you can see." The officers looked momentarily surprised. One consulted his notepad. "Ma'am, your son Richard Wilson has reported you missing and possibly confused. He's very concerned about your well-being." "I'm sure he is," I replied dryly. "Officers, my son abandoned me at a train station 2 days ago, taking my phone, wallet, and luggage. I've already filed a police report in Boston documenting this as elder abuse. I'm staying with my friend Ruth temporarily, while I secure my home and assets." The officers exchanged glances. The older one spoke gently. "Ma'am, would you mind if we came in for a moment to discuss this? There seem to be conflicting reports." "Not at all," I said, stepping aside. "In fact, I'd appreciate the opportunity to clarify the situation." For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented evidence of everything I'd claimed. The police report, the train station security footage, documentation from my doctor and the geriatric specialist, statements from my attorney about protective measures taken due to attempted financial exploitation. The officers listened attentively, their initial concern visibly shifting to understanding. When I finished, the older officer closed his notebook. Mrs. Wilson, thank you for your patience. It appears there's been a significant misrepresentation of the situation. Your son indicated an elderly woman with dementia had gone missing. Clearly, that's not the case. No, it's not, I agreed. Though I'm curious. Did my son request that you bring me to him if you found me? The younger officer nodded. He asked that we facilitate your return home, yes. Said he had medical power of attorney. Which he does not, I stated firmly. All such documents have been revoked, and my attorney has filed protective orders specifically preventing any such claims. As the officers prepared to leave, the older one paused. Mrs. Wilson, given what you've shared, would you like to file additional charges against your son? What you've described could constitute attempted fraud, false reporting, and other serious offenses. The question landed heavily. Despite everything, the thought of my son facing criminal charges created a physical ache in my chest. I thought of Jason, who would suffer if his father was prosecuted. Not at this time, I finally said. But I would appreciate it if your report clearly indicated that I am of sound mind and staying here voluntarily. After the officers left, Ruth squeezed my hand. You handled that beautifully. But Richard's getting desperate. The police welfare check means he's escalating to official channels. Which means it's time for me to go home, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. Not hiding, not running, but returning on my own terms, with all protections in place. Ruth looked concerned. Are you sure? He might try something directly. I'm counting on it, I replied. But this time, I'll be prepared, and he'll be the one caught off guard. That night, as I lay in Ruth's guest bed, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The shock and hurt remained, but they no longer controlled me. Instead, I felt a growing sense of my own power. Not just financial security or legal protection, but something more fundamental. The woman Richard had abandoned at that train station no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer, and absolutely determined to reclaim her life. Tomorrow I would return home. Not as a victim seeking shelter, but as a woman ready to face whatever came next. Richard had started this confrontation thinking I was weak. He was about to discover just how wrong he had been. The morning I decided to return home dawned clear and bright, almost mockingly beautiful given the storm I was walking into. Ruth prepared a hearty breakfast while I went over final preparations with Sarah, who had arrived early with a portfolio of documents. Everything is in place, Eleanor, Sarah confirmed, spreading papers across Ruth's dining table. Your home is legally secured. All financial accounts are protected. We have documentation of Richard's abandonment and subsequent false reports. Most importantly, we have multiple professional assessments confirming your complete competence. And the security measures at the house? I asked, buttering my toast with steady hands. Implemented yesterday. New locks installed by our recommended service. Security system updated with new codes only you know. Cameras activated at entry points. The security team will be notified automatically if anyone attempts unauthorized entry. I nodded, feeling a curious calm. And you're sure about the timing? That Richard and Karen are likely to be there. According to your neighbor's report, they've arrived at your house around 10 each morning for the past 2 days. It's currently 8:45. If the pattern holds, we'll arrive just before they do, giving you time to settle in and prepare. Ruth placed a cup of coffee before me. Are you absolutely sure you want to confront them directly? You could let Sarah handle it. I shook my head firmly. No. Richard needs to see me standing in my own home, completely in control. He needs to understand exactly who he's dealing with. I turned to Sarah. But I'm very glad you'll be there as witness and counsel. At 9:30 we left Ruth's apartment. She hugged me fiercely at the door. Call me the moment it's over. And remember, you always have a place here if you need it. The drive to my home took just under an hour. As we turned onto my street, I felt a surge of emotion at the sight of my colonial house with its carefully tended gardens. This was my sanctuary, the home Frank and I had shared for decades, filled with memories both beautiful and painful. The thought of Richard plotting to take it from me rekindled my determination. Sarah parked in the driveway and we walked to the front door together. The new key turned smoothly in the new lock. As I stepped into my foyer, I felt a profound sense of reclaiming what was mine. A quick walkthrough confirmed Grace's reports. Drawers left slightly open, papers disturbed on my desk, closet doors ajar. They had searched thoroughly but apparently found nothing of value to their scheme. I settled in my living room, in Frank's old leather chair that had become my favorite reading spot, and waited. At 10:17, a car pulled into my driveway. Through the front window, I watched Richard and Karen emerge, speaking tensely to each other. Richard used his key in the lock, the old key that no longer worked. "That's strange," I heard him say through the door. "It's not turning." "Try again," Karen urged. "Maybe it's sticking." After several failed attempts, Richard rang the doorbell. Sarah looked at me questioningly. I nodded and she moved to answer it. The shock on Richard's face when the door opened to reveal not an empty house, but a professional-looking woman with a portfolio was visible even from where I sat. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked coolly. Richard recovered quickly. "I'm Richard Wilson, Eleanor Wilson's son. This is my mother's house. Who are you, and why have the locks been changed?" "I'm Sarah Abernathy, attorney for Eleanor Wilson. The locks were changed at Mrs. Wilson's request, for her security and protection." Karen pushed forward. "Where is Eleanor? Is she okay? We've been worried sick." "Mrs. Wilson is perfectly fine," Sarah replied. "In fact, she's right inside." She stepped aside, revealing me sitting calmly in my chair. The color drained from Richard's face as our eyes met. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I broke the silence. "Hello, Richard. Karen. Please come in. We have matters to discuss." They entered hesitantly, like trespassers rather than invited guests. Richard's expression cycled rapidly through shock, confusion, and something like fear before settling into a mask of concern. "Mom. Thank God you're okay. We've been out of our minds with worry. Where have you been? What happened at the train station? I looked everywhere for you." The performance was almost impressive in its audacity. I let his questions hang in the air for a long moment before responding. "Richard, please stop. We both know exactly what happened at the train station. You drove away with my belongings and left me stranded. It's all documented on security footage, which the police now have." "What? No. Mom, you wandered off while I was parking." "I searched for hours." His voice cracked with manufactured emotion. "I've been calling hospitals, police stations, everyone." Karen stepped forward, her face a perfect mask of concern. "Eleanor, we've been so worried. Richard hasn't slept in days looking for you. The doctor said your confusion might get worse, but we never imagined." "That's enough," I interrupted, my voice steel. "There are no doctors who said any such thing. My medical records confirm I have no cognitive issues whatsoever. What I do have is documentation of your systematic attempt to portray me as incompetent so you could gain control of my assets." Richard's face hardened. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You've been acting confused for months. Dad would want me to take care of you, to protect you and the family legacy. Don't you dare invoke your father," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Frank would be appalled by what you've done." Sarah placed her portfolio on the coffee table, opening it to reveal organized documents. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, I've been retained to protect Eleanor's interests. We have comprehensive evidence of what appears to be a coordinated attempt at elder abuse and financial exploitation." She began laying out documents one by one. Security footage from the train station showing Mrs. Wilson being abandoned. Police reports documenting the incident. Medical evaluations confirming Mrs. Wilson's complete mental competence. Documentation of unauthorized access, attempts to Mrs. Wilson's financial accounts immediately following the abandonment. False reports to authorities regarding Mrs. Wilson's mental state. Witness statements regarding misrepresentations made about Mrs. Wilson's condition. With each document, Richard's face grew paler. Karen's eyes darted nervously between the papers and the door, as if calculating an escape route. "This is ridiculous," Richard finally sputtered. "I was trying to help. Mom's been slipping for months. Ask anyone." "We did," I said quietly. Your claims don't align with observations from my friends, my doctor, or the geriatric specialist who evaluated me this week. No one has observed any confusion or cognitive decline, except you and Karen. Karen's composure cracked first. Richard, we should go. Now. Not quite yet, Sarah interjected. There are consequences to consider. Richard's expression shifted to desperation. Mom, listen to me. Everything I did was for your own good, for the family. I was worried about you living alone, managing all this money by yourself. Dad would have wanted me to step in. Your father taught me everything I needed to know about managing our finances, I replied. And he trusted me completely to do so for the rest of my life. I leaned forward, meeting my son's eyes directly. But let's be honest, Richard. This wasn't about concern for my well-being. This was about the money. You've been in financial trouble for some time, haven't you? The new business is failing. The house you can't really afford. The lifestyle that keeps you in debt. A flush crept up Richard's neck. Karen looked away, confirming my suspicions. You thought I didn't know, I continued. But I've watched you struggling, making increasingly desperate decisions. I would have helped if you'd asked honestly. Instead, you chose this. What happens now? Richard asked, his voice suddenly small. Sarah answered before I could. That depends on Mrs. Wilson. The evidence supports criminal charges for elder abuse, attempted fraud, filing false reports, and potential financial exploitation. These are serious offenses with potential prison time. The word prison hung in the air like a thundercloud. Karen gave a small strangled sound. However, Sarah continued, looking to me, Mrs. Wilson has indicated she may be open to an alternative approach, provided certain conditions are met. All eyes turned to me. In that moment, I felt the full weight of the decision before me. Part of me wanted Richard to face the harshest possible consequences for his betrayal. But another part, the mother who had held him as a baby, taught him to ride a bike, celebrated his graduations, couldn't bear the thought of him in prison, of Jason visiting his father behind bars. These are my terms, I said firmly. First, you will both sign legally binding agreements acknowledging what you attempted and relinquishing any current or future claims on my estate or property. Richard nodded quickly. Second, you will enroll in financial counseling to address the issues that led to this situation. I will not continue to fund poor decisions or unsustainable lifestyles. Karen looked like she might object, but Richard squeezed her arm. Third, any relationship moving forward will be on my terms, with boundaries I set. This includes my relationship with Jason, which will be direct and not filtered through either of you. And if we agree to these terms? Richard asked cautiously. Then I won't press criminal charges. But understand this clearly. These conditions are non-negotiable, and this is your only chance. If you violate any part of our agreement, or if you ever attempt anything like this again, I will not hesitate to pursue legal action to the fullest extent possible. The silence that followed was heavy with the shifting of power. Richard, who had entered my home expecting to maintain his deception, now sat cornered by truth and evidence. The son who had thought his mother helpless now faced her strength and resolve. We agree, he finally said, unable to meet my eyes. Sarah produced the documents I had prepared in advance, placing them on the coffee table with a pen. These reflect the terms Mrs. Wilson has outlined. Review them carefully before signing. As Richard and Karen bent over the papers, I watched them with mixed emotions. There was no joy in this victory, no satisfaction in their humiliation. There was only the necessary reclaiming of my life and dignity, and the establishment of truth where lies had threatened to take root. After they signed, Sarah gathered the documents. I'll file these today. Mrs. Wilson will contact you when she's ready regarding arrangements for Jason. Richard stood, finally looking directly at me. Mom, Not today, Richard, I interrupted gently. I can't hear apologies yet. We'll talk when I'm ready. They left without further protest, Karen practically dragging Richard to the car. Through my window, I watched them pull away, their postures rigid with defeat and shame. Sarah touched my shoulder. Are you all right, Eleanor? I nodded slowly. Yes, I think I am. Not happy, certainly, but at peace with my decision. You showed remarkable compassion, she observed. Many in your position would have pursued maximum penalties. Punishment wasn't my goal, I replied. Protection was. I needed to secure my independence and establish consequences clear enough to prevent a repeat attempt. Beyond that, he's still my son, however terribly he's behaved. After Sarah left, I walked through my house alone, touching familiar objects, re-establishing my connection to this space that had almost been taken from me. In each room, I felt Frank's presence, almost as if he were walking beside me, approving of how I'd handled this crisis. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, a glass of Frank's favorite whiskey in my hand. The garden needed attention after my absence. Deadheading and weeding awaited tomorrow. But tonight was for reflection, for acknowledging the painful truth that my relationship with my son would never be the same, while accepting that perhaps this forced honesty was necessary for whatever would come next. My phone rang, Ruth checking in as promised. It's done, I told her. They signed the agreements. No charges filed. Are you sure that's what you wanted? She asked gently. No, I admitted. What I wanted was for none of this to have happened. What I wanted was the son I thought I had. But we can't always get what we want, can we? Sometimes we have to settle for what we need. In this case, security and truth. And how do you feel now? I considered the question carefully. Stronger than I knew I could be. Sadder than I expected to feel in victory. But most of all free. Free from deception, free from manipulation, and free to build whatever comes next on my own terms. That, Ruth said warmly, sounds like the very definition of walking away without looking over your shoulder. I smiled at her reference to my earlier determination. Yes, I suppose it is. And tomorrow is a new day, with a garden that needs tending and a life that's entirely my own. The weeks following the confrontation with Richard and Karen brought both challenges and unexpected gifts. Rebuilding my life required practical steps and emotional work in equal measure, a balance I approached with the same determination that had seen me through the crisis. My first priority was securing my home and finances permanently. With Sarah's help, I established a comprehensive estate plan with ironclad protections. We created a trust for Jason that would provide for his education and future needs, while remaining completely outside Richard's control. I installed an advanced security system with cameras and remote monitoring, allowing me to check on my home even when traveling. Most importantly, I assembled a network of trusted professionals, financial, legal, and medical, who understood my situation and were committed to protecting my interests. Ruth became an unexpected blessing in my life. What began as emergency shelter during a crisis blossomed into genuine friendship. We discovered shared interests in gardening, classic films, and community service. Every Thursday became our standing lunch date, usually followed by a matinee at the old theater downtown, or an afternoon volunteering at the local literacy center. You know, Ruth said during one of our lunches, when I saw you at that train station, I never imagined we'd end up like this, swapping gardening tips and arguing about whether Hitchcock's early work beats his later films. Life's strange that way, I replied. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best connections. Building a stronger support system became a priority. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, partly due to being busy but partly because Richard had subtly discouraged some of these relationships. Grace from next door became a regular morning coffee companion. My bridge club, which I'd stopped attending when Richard suggested it was too much excitement, welcomed me back with open arms. I even reconnected with my sister Martha, arranging the visit that Richard had falsely promised. The most difficult and delicate relationship to navigate was with my grandson Jason. After giving Richard and Karen 2 weeks to explain the situation to him in age-appropriate terms, a condition of our agreement, I invited Jason for a weekend at my home. He arrived looking nervous, his 12-year-old face serious beyond his years. Dad said you guys had a big fight, he said as we settled in the kitchen with cookies I'd baked that morning. That's true, I acknowledged, keeping my tone gentle but honest. Your dad and I disagreed about some important things and it got very serious. But Jason, I want you to know that nothing that happened changes how much I love you. His eyes welled with tears. Dad said we might not see you anymore. He said you were really mad. I moved to sit beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. I was very upset with your dad, yes. But you are not responsible for adult problems, and you will always be my grandson. We'll still have our special times together. That's a promise. Over cookies and milk, I let Jason ask whatever questions he needed, answering truthfully but carefully, never disparaging his parents despite everything. Children shouldn't be forced to take sides in adult conflicts, and I was determined that Jason would maintain healthy relationships with all his family members, including me. By summer's end, we had established a new routine. Jason spent one weekend a month with me, plus Wednesday afternoons when I picked him up from school and helped with homework before dinner. These times became precious islands of normalcy in the changed landscape of our family. My relationship with Richard remained distant but civil. Our interactions were limited to logistics regarding Jason and occasional family events where we maintained polite facades. Karen avoided me entirely, which was probably for the best. The trust that had been broken couldn't be repaired quickly, if ever. But for Jason's sake, we all made efforts to coexist peacefully. The healing journey wasn't linear. Some days brought perfect clarity and peace. Others ambushed me with grief for what had been lost. On one particularly difficult evening, after finding an old photo album filled with pictures of Richard as a child, I called my new therapist in tears. I keep asking myself where I went wrong. I confessed. Was there something I could have done differently that would have prevented this? Dr. Mitchell's response was gentle but firm. Eleanor, parents have tremendous influence on their children, but ultimately, adult children make their own choices. Richard's actions reflect his character and decisions, not your parenting. The fact that you're still showing compassion despite his betrayal speaks volumes about your character. Those words became a touchstone I returned to whenever guilt or doubt crept in. Gradually, I learned to separate the son I had raised and loved from the man who had betrayed me, to grieve the relationship we once had while accepting the reality of what now existed. Unexpectedly, my experience led to a new purpose. Through Sarah, I connected with an organization dedicated to preventing elder financial abuse. What began as sharing my story at a support group evolved into volunteer work, speaking at community centers and senior housing complexes about financial protection and warning signs. You have a way of making people listen, the program director told me after one presentation. You're helping more people than you know. Standing before groups of seniors, sharing both my painful experience and practical protective measures, I found meaning in my ordeal. Each person who approached afterward with questions about securing their assets or handling family pressure represented a potential crisis averted, a vulnerability recognized before it could be exploited. As autumn painted my garden in russet and gold, I hosted a small dinner party. Ruth, Grace and her husband, my sister Martha who was visiting from Boston, and two new friends from my volunteer work. Seated around my dining table, enjoying food and conversation, I was struck by how my social circle had transformed and expanded since that terrible morning at the train station. A toast, Ruth proposed, raising her glass. To Eleanor, who reminds us all that it's never too late to begin again. Later, as I washed dishes while Martha dried, my sister observed, "You seem different, Ellie. Stronger somehow." I considered her words. I am stronger. Not because I wanted to be, but because I had to be. It's strange. In trying to prove I was vulnerable and incompetent, Richard actually forced me to discover just how capable I really am. "Do you think you'll ever truly forgive him?" Martha asked. I placed another clean plate on the rack before answering. Forgiveness isn't a destination, I've decided. It's a process with steps forward and back. I've let go of the anger that would only poison me. I've established boundaries that protect me. I'm finding joy and purpose despite what happened. Is that forgiveness? I'm not sure. But it's where I am right now, and it feels right. That night, after my guests had gone and the house was quiet, I sat in Frank's chair with a cup of tea, reflecting on all that had changed in 6 months. The betrayal had been devastating, but in its aftermath, I had discovered reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. I had built new relationships and deepened existing ones. I had found purpose in helping others avoid similar pain. Most importantly, I had learned that true security comes not just from financial precautions or legal protections, though those are certainly necessary. True security comes from knowing your own worth, establishing healthy boundaries, and building a community of genuine support. It comes from facing betrayal without becoming bitter, from finding meaning in even the most painful experiences. As I prepare to end my story, I want to thank you for listening. Perhaps you're watching because you faced a similar betrayal, or perhaps you're simply drawn to stories of resilience. Whatever brought you here, I hope you'll take away this truth. We cannot always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. We can choose to learn, to grow, and ultimately to walk forward without constantly looking over our shoulders. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after betrayal? How did you maintain your boundaries while allowing for healing? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found value in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and renewal. Remember, no matter what challenges you're facing, you have more strength than you know. Thank you for being part of my healing journey.